Now, February the 24th last week marked 1 year since Russia began its military operations in Ukraine. Although operations are still underway, a diplomatic effort for peace remains the key in solving the crisis.
The ambassador of the Russian Federation to Indonesia, Her Excellency Lyudmila Vorobieva, emphasized in a press briefing on Wednesday, February 15th, that Russia is currently seeking a way to end the operation.
The ambassador said that Russia is endorsing the Minsk agreements as a roadmap to solve the conflict, which provides the Donetsk and Luhansk special status and thereby allow Russians living in Ukraine to speak Russian and develop their own culture. And at this very moment, we have in our studio the ambassador herself, Her Excellency Lyudmila Georgievna Vorobieva, to share her thoughts on the matter. So thank you so much for coming to the 3-Hour News Show today.
Thank you so much.
And it's very an honor to have you to talk about things in this moment. So probably I want to see how Russia perceive Indonesia's leadership in the past G20, because now currently Indonesia is holding the chairmanship of ASEAN and after the presidency of G20. And how does Russia perceive Indonesian leadership with the current global issue, Madam?
From the very beginning, we supported Indonesia's chairmanship and the presidency in G20. We supported the priorities identified by Indonesia, and we participate in most of the events organized by Indonesia. We had delegations on different levels. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, visited Indonesia twice.
Nice.
The Speaker of our Parliament, Valentina Matviyenko, came to Jakarta for the P20. So we are really appreciative of all the efforts made by Indonesia. You were under big pressure actually to exclude Russia from this very important international format and to switch the focus from relevant economic and financial issues to the political affairs. So we think that Indonesia was very successful. And of course, the declaration that was adopted by the leaders is a sign of this success. From our part, we were also quite flexible because this declaration includes some language on Ukrainian crisis. And though it's not ideal from our point of view, actually it's acceptable, and it was accepted by all the countries. So bravo, Indonesia. And we wish you the same success in your ASEAN chairmanship. Russia is a strategic partner with ASEAN, and we hope that Indonesia will have the same success.
Well, thank you for always supporting Indonesia. And Indonesia would never put any country on the edge and the corner of the table. So thank you for also coming to Bali at that time. And now, as we see, Indonesia and Russia has been having this bilateral ties for 73 years, quite a long time. And we want to, foster this relationship. So how do you think what the two countries should do to foster, more closer and even deeper diplomatic relations?
Indeed, for 73 years, we had our diplomatic relations. But even before that, I can tell you that there are some very interesting events in our bilateral relations. For instance, that the Crown Prince of the Russian Empire visited Batavia in the end of the 19th century. Or for instance, we have a grave of our Navy officer in Weh Island in Kota Sabang, who died in 1901, and he's buried there. So even long before our relation became officially established, we had this humanitarian, so to say, interaction. And especially it flourished in the 60s when President Sukarno visited our country 4 times, and the song Rayuan Pulau Kelapa was translated into Russian and became very popular.
I was about to ask that because some of my Russian friends, they told me about, hey, I know about the song Rayuan Pulau Kelapa. How did you know that?
Madam, would you sing a little bit of the lyrics?
Страна родная, Индонезия. I don't sing that.
Thank you.
But you know, the title of this song in Russia is Indonesia, My Love. So that actually transpires the very warm feeling that Russians had and have to Indonesia. Before President Sukarno came to the Soviet Union, to Russia, there was a documentary made on Indonesia, and the soundtrack for this documentary was Rayuan Pulau Kelapa, translated into Russian. So when my father found out that I was going to be posted in Indonesia, the first thing he did, he sang this song to me in Russian.
Oh, this is very heartwarming.
Yeah, that's very heartwarming.
I love this. Okay, so, Madam, I want to ask further about the issue that has been the elephant in the room in this one at the moment with regards to Ukraine. How are the latest peace talks that Russia offered to Ukraine and other related parties in this case? How is the progress? Because we know that it's going to be very challenging. But what we want to know also, what are the challenges in these talks? Are there any particular notions that we should pay attention to?
Well, first of all, sorry to say that, but I would like to maybe make a little bit correction on what I said during the briefing on the 15th of February. We don't think that Minsk agreements are relevant anymore. As we understand now, the Minsk agreements were signed by the Ukrainian side only just for one purpose, is to gain time and to further arm the troops, Ukrainian troops. There was no intention either from Ukrainian government or the West, which supports actually this illegitimate government who came to power through a coup d'etat, a very bloody coup d'etat in 2014. So there was no intention to fulfill these agreements and to find a peaceful solution to the crisis. Minsk agreement presented a clear roadmap, and Russia endorsed them. So the Lugansk and Donetsk regions should have acquired a special autonomous status and could be allowed to develop their own culture. It means Russian culture, Russian language, etc., etc. It never happened. For 8 years, Lugansk and Donetsk regions were attacked, bombed and shelled by the Ukrainian army. 14,000 people died. So one of the targets that has been identified by our president of the special military operation in Ukraine is to protect the people of Lugansk and Donetsk. And now another 2 regions that became part of the Russian Federation, you know, that people there held referendums and voted in favor of joining Russia. So it's a duty of any country to protect their citizens, and we will protect people who live in these regions. On the peace talks, unfortunately, we don't see any intention, neither from Kiev nor from the West, to engage into any peace dialogue. Despite all the beautiful words and statements and declarations, may I remind you that last year, when we were on the brink of concluding an agreement with Ukraine, and we had several rounds of peace talks in Turkey, it was Ukrainian side who withdrew from these talks. After Boris Johnson visited Kiev. Immediately after that, Zelensky, who is not independent, of course, he is just following the orders from Washington and its allies. So immediately, Zelensky gave the order for his delegation to walk out from the talks. Moreover, in September last year, Zelensky has signed a decree banning any kind of talks or peace dialogue with Russia. The West, who supports Zelensky, instead of urging him or the Ukrainian side to engage into dialogue, is sending more and more arms.
Right.
They are just pouring fire into oil. That means the intention is to make this conflict last in order to weaken Russia, or at the best to destroy Russia.
Yeah. Well, talking about the peace talk, is that true that This is because we've been hearing news from different platforms, so we just want to have the clearest information here. Regarding the peace talk, what does Russia want in terms of it? So if you do the peace talk, do you really need to have all the areas, for example, the Donetsk, for example, and Luhansk, to be on your side and not being returned to Ukraine? Is that what Russia wants?
Well, I think it's very clear. These regions are part of Russia now. They are regions like Moscow or St. Petersburg or Siberia, and it's the will of the people. They don't want to go back to Ukraine. They want to be part of Russia. So there is no question of these regions going back to Russia, like Crimea. Mm-hmm. You remember that this actually crisis started, well, it was the so-called cold phase of this crisis, started with Crimea voting for going back to Russia. And the reason is that Kiev started its very Russophobic policies in 2014. So the regions of Ukraine, which are predominantly Russian, and they're Donetsk, Lugansk, Crimea, eastern Ukraine, they protested. But instead of trying to solve this issue by dialogue, and the Minsk agreements presented a perfect opportunity for that, Kiev continued, voted for the military option.
Okay, so also still in regards to that, we see about the UN General Assembly resolutions entitled Principles of the Charter of the United Nations, underlying a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine, quote unquote. So that was adopted last week. How is Russia responding to that? Is this something that can delay any further peace talks or otherwise?
It has nothing to do with peace talks. It's the General Assembly resolution being important. It's not binding. The purpose actually for having this kind of resolution by Ukraine and the West is to show that Russia is isolated, that Russia is, is the bad guy. But in fact, we see that we're not isolated. We have so many partners and friends in different regions of the world. Unfortunately, there's a lot of blackmail and pressure involved from the West, and many countries just don't dare to speak out to end these neo-colonial policies of the West.
All right. Well, last year, if you remember, Indonesia attempted to act as the mediator. So our president visited Kiev and visited Moscow at the same time, meeting President Putin as well. Do you think Indonesia should repeat that kind of effort at this time? Because it's been 1 year, and of course, we want to see peace.
We too. We also want to see peace. Yeah. We are very grateful for all these efforts made by Indonesia, and personally, President Joko Widodo, he visited Moscow. They had a very good conversation with President Putin. But it's not the question of who will be a mediator now. Because whoever becomes a mediator, unfortunately, perhaps these efforts will fail right now because the West doesn't want to have this dialogue. And the West is not allowing Ukrainian side to have this dialogue. And by Ukrainian side, I don't mean the people of Ukraine. I mean the government who is dragging their own people in this conflict. And it's a tragedy for Ukrainian people.
So if there are more ammunition sent to Ukraine, Russia would still respond to wherever long.
Of course, the more ammunition, the more arms is sent to Ukraine, the longer the conflict would last. But we're sure that Russia cannot be won on battlefield. If we look at history, you know what happened to anyone who attacked Russia. Remember Napoleon, 19th century, Russian troops ended up in Paris. Hitler attacked Russia in last century. Russian troops ended up in Berlin. I will not continue.
Long list of that.
Okay, so you were mentioning about Russia has friends in other regions, and that means it's geopolitical. And with regards to geopolitical dynamics this year, will Russia continue to promote the multipolar world as what you also stated in the press briefing in Jakarta on February 15? May we know why Russia believes in this stance?
It's very simple. If you think about it, now we see that there's the conflict between two geopolitical models. One is proposed by the United States, and to put it in very simple words, what the United States is proposing to the world: we're the best, we're the strongest, we're the most democratic. You do what we say, you will be okay. You don't do what we say, we will come and destroy you, either economically or politically, or military, I'm sorry. And we've seen that happen many times already. You remember Yugoslavia, you remember Iraq, you remember Libya, Afghanistan, Syria, and we don't agree with this kind of political model, geopolitical model. We are proposing another geopolitical model, which we think reflects more the realities when there are many centers of power emerging in the world, economic. First of all, China, India, ASEAN, Latin American. And with this economic might comes also political influence. But that's what the West cannot accept, because their prosperity is based not on equal cooperation, but on exploiting other countries. We propose a model where all countries is equal, where all countries, the interest, economic, security, political interests of all countries are respected. That's what the West cannot accept.
All right. Now, we want to talk about this stage. Do we need to, should we worry about the re-escalation, as you mentioned, about the Minsk agreement that was done just before the military operation, and now the nuclear armament and besieged by the parties currently conflicting in Ukraine? So should we worry about the re-escalation about this?
Well, that's a question that should be addressed to the West. What are they doing? What is their final purpose? From the side of Russia, we have no wish for war. We know what war is. War is a tragedy. We lost 27 million people in World War II, but sometimes you have to protect yourself. So for us, it's a matter of survival and of keeping our country keeping the integrity of our country.
Right.
So if the West listens to our concern, takes into consideration our interest, we are ready for dialogue, for interaction, for cooperation. That's not we who introduce sanctions against anyone. It's not we who are threatening anyone, and saying you're not democratic enough, or you're not protecting human rights enough, or you're not green enough, your economy is not green enough. We're not using this kind of instruments or language.
All right.
Madam Ambassador, it has been a very interesting conversation, but everything has come to an end. We got to the last question, because although I really want to converse more, but as the last question, ahead of the ASEAN summit this year, is there any expectation from Russian side on Indonesia's chairmanship?
As I mentioned, we are strategic partners with ASEAN. ASEAN is very important for us, and growing even more important in the present geopolitical situation. We support ASEAN centrality. We think that we can do more in terms of economic cooperation with ASEAN as an organization and ASEAN countries individually. You asked about, the first question was what we can do together with Indonesia. We have so many things that we can do together, energy, shipbuilding, aircraft building, IT, pharmaceuticals. So we can do a lot. Our economies are complementary. You know, we have things that we can offer to ASEAN. Indonesia have things that can offer and is offering to Russia. Palm oil, we have no problems actually, with no conditions on palm oil. So we can do a lot together. We hope that Indonesia will also not bow into this pressure to exclude Russia from everywhere. We intend to be part of the ASEAN Plus Dialogue Partners events. I cannot confirm it officially, but we hope that President Putin can finally come to Indonesia. And we really, once again, we wish Indonesia
It's going to be in Labuan Bajo. Will President Putin come? Maybe
just to see the beauty of Labuan Bajo.
And the Komodo dragon.
Exactly. And all that.
I'll write a report on the beauty of
please.
Labuan
Yes, please.
Even though it's very, very busy, I'm sure, in your country, but just to have a little bit of break, that would be nice. Well, thank you so much, Madam Ambassador, for having such a clarification here in the 3-Hour News Show, and hoping that everything, especially with the peace resolution efforts, will come to to the stage that we really all want, which is peace. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.